Participants in the Munich Security Conference are convinced that the world is in a deep crisis. There is no festive mood among its many high-ranking participants, that the atmosphere in the fashionable Bayerischer Hof hotel these days will be rather anxious and pessimistic became clear on the eve of the forum when the annual Munich Security Report on the state of affairs in the Euro-Atlantic and the world was released. This year's document is entitled Lose-Lose? It was clear from the UN Secretary-General's speech that the question mark in the title of the report could have been omitted. The current world order, in the assessment of Antonio Guterres, is not working for anyone. In fact, I will put it this way. It does not work for anyone at all, the UN Secretary-General admitted. It is obvious that our world is in a deep crisis. Global governance in its current form is entrenching divisions and fueling discontent. According to Antonio Guterres, the world faces existential challenges, while the global community is in its most divided and fragmented state in 75 years. Even the Cold War era was in some ways less dangerous, he said, adding that today, states do whatever they want without any accountability. Among the current hotspots, he emphasized the escalation in the Middle East and the conflict over Ukraine. We desperately need a just and sustainable peace for Ukraine, for Russia, and for the whole world, Antonio Guterres addressed the conference participants. Most representatives of Western countries, judging by the speeches of the first day, however, believe that the conditions for negotiating peace in Ukraine have not yet been created. The chairman of the conference, former German diplomat Christoph Heusgen, said that he did not see any readiness on the part of the Russian authorities to resolve the conflict through diplomacy. He also justified the fact that the Russian official delegation was not invited to the forum again, as it was a year ago. Vice President Kamala Harris spoke on behalf of the United States at the opening of the event. Shortly before the beginning of the session with her participation, it became known that oppositionist Alexei Navalny died in the colony. Commenting on this news, Kamala Harris said that, "Whatever story the Russian authorities tell, Russia is responsible for it." Many other Western politicians made similar statements in Munich, and Alexei Navalny's widow, Yulia, who attended the conference as a guest, also made a separate statement. As for Kamala Harris, according to the American media, during her trip to Munich, it was most important for her to reassure European allies of the United States, who are agitated by the increasingly real prospect of Donald Trump's return to the White House. Recall that in his first term as president, the Republicans seriously considered the option of withdrawing the United States from NATO, and last week said that under him, the Americans would not protect European countries that do not spend enough on their defense from a possible attack by Russia. Kamala Harris, on the other hand, emphasized in her speech that the US cannot afford to isolate itself and must be prepared to stand up for its allies. But there are those in the United States who disagree, she said. Clearly alluding to Donald Trump. They believe that it is in the interest of the American people to isolate themselves from the world, to abandon their commitments to our allies, to support dictators, and to use repression. Such a worldview is dangerous, destabilizing, and short-sighted. For the Joe Biden administration, Kamala Harris said, "The United States' sacred commitment to NATO remains unwavering. I am confident that fulfilling our long-standing role as a global leader is in the fundamental interests of the American people," she said, addressing not so much the forum participants as the voters in the United States, and apparently also the congressman blocking the next aid package for Ukraine. The vice president's speech implied that the White House was determined to persuade lawmakers to support the relevant bill to provide the critical weapons and resources that Ukraine so badly needs. The European allies of the United States, however, judging by the speeches on stage and conversations on the sidelines of the conference, are increasingly preparing for the possibility that the White House may change power and they will have to ensure their own security and support Ukraine. Against this background, Germany and France are already seeking to play a more prominent role in European affairs. Both countries have already announced their intention to increase spending on military needs. On Friday, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and French President Emmanuel Macron signed agreements on strengthening security cooperation with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. There is no talk of guarantees in the spirit of the fifth article of the Washington Treaty establishing NATO. An attack on one member is considered an attack on all. But at the same time, Germany and France promise Ukraine long-term and comprehensive assistance in strengthening its defense capabilities. Earlier, the UK signed the same agreement with Ukraine. Olaf Scholz called Friday's agreements historic. According to him, Germany supports Ukraine because it increases its own security, and therefore Berlin, like Paris, will help Kiev regardless of what Washington does. Vladimir Zelensky appears to be counting on this very much as well. "We do not count on Germany alone, we count on the entire European Union," he said at a press conference in Berlin after signing a new agreement with the Federal Republic of Germany. At the same time, he expressed hope that the United States of America will not fall away. Ukraine's president is expected at a conference in Munich on Saturday. Last year, he addressed the event via video link from Kiev, but this time it is particularly important for him, according to media reports, to convince Western allies to continue supporting his country and prevent Ukraine fatigue. The session with the Ukrainian president is scheduled for Saturday morning. He will speak after German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and before a discussion with NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg, Estonian Prime Minister Kai Kallas, and Republican Senator Pete Ricketts. The title of this session, "In It to Win It, The Future of Ukraine and Transatlantic Security," clearly refers to the report on a possible universal loss. The Vice Speaker of the Federation Council, a regular participant of the Munich Conference, having familiarized himself with this year's report, noted that instead of last year's victorious fanfare, its authors had come to a sober understanding that there will be no winners. So far, it is useless to expect any sensible conclusions. The West still wants to put out the fire with gasoline, to supply weapons, to impose sanctions, to refuse dialogue, but it is already clear to everyone that this is a direct path to lose-lose.